Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another conversational pace trail shoe review. We have a pretty exciting one today, and we have the Salomon Pulsar Trail Pro 2. So this is the second generation of the Pulsar Trail Pro. All they did was add the 2 to it, and it's actually a pretty minor update, but I think that's really all Salomon needed to do with this shoe between the first and second generation. So with that, let's dive into this shoe. Little disclaimer, these shoes were provided to us by Salomon and Running Warehouse. We're under no financial obligation to say whether we like a product or not, because we want to keep these reviews authentic and beneficial for you. Nobody will get to preview or watch this footage before it gets published to YouTube. So with that, here we go. Quick shoe stats about the shoe. $160 for the Salomon Pulsar Trail Pro 2. My pair came in right around 9.5 ounces, and this is a US men's size 10. Stack height, we're looking at 27 millimeters in the forefoot, 33 in the heel. That makes for a 6 millimeter drop. Actually does have quite a bit of a rocker to it as well, both in the heel and in the forefoot. Moving on to some of the materials, we have I would say like relatively one-piece upper, but with a couple different mesh types. So in the forefoot and around the sides of the midfoot, we have a pretty like tight weave, non-stretch mesh. And then moving over the tongue, which there's no actual tongue in the shoe because it's a full one-piece kind of knit material. So it's full knit across the top of the tongue and looping around the ankle collar. So it does have some stretch there and some stretch across the top of the midfoot. Classic Salomon quick lace system with their little plastic pull down dealy bob, whatever that is. Lace garage, that's entirely too small, but I was able to make it work. Very minimal padding across the heel and the back of the ankle collar. And that was probably the biggest issue with the very first Pulsar Trail Pro, was that there wasn't enough structure around the heel and it was too floppy. For the second generation of the shoe, they didn't add any plastic or anything like that, but they stiffened up some of the plastic overlay back here and added just a little bit more foam to the back. They might have even added one more additional piece of just like fabric and glue to the back. So like it still flops down, but you see it kind of rebounds back pretty quick. That's pretty much the difference between the first one and the second one, is the changes to this heel collar. The midsole, it's a dual layer midsole. So it's called Energy Foam. There's a very thin red line, which is actually their Energy Blade plate. But we'll get to that in a sec. So the midsole foam is 2 different layers. The part that's underneath the plate is much firmer, adds some protection, some stiffness, a little bit of snap to the shoe. And then the much larger layer of foam above the plate is their softer energy foam. Like, I don't know if this is actually what Salomon would call their super foam, but it's the softest Salomon foam that I've ever run in. And it's a combination of EVA and olefin, which olefin's been thrown around actually before in shoes. It's an expanded polypropylene material. So it's like plastic basically, but it can be mixed in with different materials. So that's why they say combination of EVA and olefin. So it's like a hybrid, almost super foam kind of thing, which actually lends to a nice feel out on the trail, but more about that later. The Energy Blade plate is actually just TPU. So that's just fancy for plastic. It's a plastic plate, but it does provide a little bit of snap to it. Much more flexible than a carbon plate. The outsole is classic Contagrip rubber, 3.5 millimeter lugs all the way around. I just feel like Salomon, they haven't changed this in like a decade, and I just don't think they need to. Finn, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing excellent. It's great to be here. And This is one of the sexiest shoes that I have ever put on my feet.
Finn, you've said that on quite a few review episodes, and I'm starting to think you're just like rather easy to in regards to shoes and how you think about them. I will agree with you though. I think that's one thing Salomon's always been so good at is the style of their shoe and the cohesiveness with what they're going for. Like Salomon's always been about like sleek, clean lines, fast, speed. No company does matching midsole color and upper color better than Salomon. Like when they had their S-Lab red and the red line would go down into the midsole phone and those reds actually matched perfectly. So much admiration to the color scientists working at Salomon. Yeah, that was slight color tangent there, but what kind of running did you get in this shoe?
94.5 miles in this shoe, really in a pretty condensed period over the last 2 weeks. Multivariate environment, did 20 miles with you on the Black Canyon 100K trail this past weekend. So desert environment. Did a bunch of snow running here in my hometown of Salt Lake City, experiencing a pretty big winter here. And then even got some road miles and outside of the 94 in a running environment. Honestly, did a fair bit of walking around in the shoe too, because it's the first shoe I have ever had sent to me where I wanted to put it on with a pair of sweatpants or jeans and just kind of walk around town, do errands and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely fits into that like stylish athleisure kind of build. My run this morning ticked me over to that triple digit mark. I'm up to 100.3 miles. It was all in Ashland, mostly single track dirt road. I probably have less than 5 pavement miles on this shoe, so it's pretty much all dirt. Did get some snow, ice, mud. So, and probably light to moderate technical terrain. I probably took them on something decently technical once. But and the longest run I did was, I think, also right at that 20-mile mark. But pretty vert heavy here, so like 4,500 feet of climbing. So I definitely got to test this on some steeper descending. In terms of the fit for you, Finn, what did you do? Would you go for sizing, and like how was it across the size and the width?
Yep, I'm a size 12, true to size for sure. Good fit in the forefoot. Talking about the outsole, a little bit less grip than I was expecting for a Salomon shoe. Maybe we can talk about that a bit. I'm not sure if that's a controversial opinion. I just didn't feel like in the relatively technical terrain that I tested the shoe on, it would be my go-to after that experience. And then a couple things on the upper. I felt like with this whole drawstring method that they have, there was good lockdown, but maybe this was unique to my foot, and it's something that we laughed about actually on that run in Black Canyon. I spent a fair number of miles in this shoe without tightening this drawstring. I felt like just getting my foot into the boot, that it felt default secure to me, which maybe was something that Naked was aiming for with their shoe. I felt it with this shoe independent of tightening. And then of course, once I did tighten it, it felt better. But that was an interesting phenomenon to me.
Yeah, see, I would have had no chance with that because like you can kind of see even just with it taken off, like there's already a decent amount of bunching across forward because the forefoot was like a little bit too wide for me, just stock right out of the box. I mean, in my opinion, that's why shoes have laces, because you can tighten or loosen them. And I was able to tighten this down to create a great lockdown. Like, yeah, there was a little bit of bunching, but it wasn't ever an issue in terms of blisters or anything like that.
One more thing I want to say about the upper, and I'm curious if you had this experience as well. We were talking about this padding on the upper prior to recording. This created breathability issues for me. This is the other shoe besides the Naked shoe that I actually felt like I got hot in, especially during our desert run in Black Canyon. I'm curious if you experienced that at all.
I don't think I got to run in this shoe in like anything over 45 or 50 degrees. So I didn't notice anything from a temperature standpoint. The biggest issue I actually had with this upper was actually still the heel, the knit heel. I just wish it were a more traditional heel cup. Like I liked everything from the heel forward, but the lack of a plastic heel cup, the lack of more padding. Actually the non-pro version of the shoe, just the Pulsar Trail, has more of a classic style heel cup, I would actually love to just have that in the back half of the shoe, because the first few runs of the shoe, because it's just fabric and it's a shape, there's no foam to mold around your foot. I actually got some hot spots on the back of my heel the first few runs. And they did break in a little bit. Like I can't wear a super thin sock. I have to wear medium to thick socks, or else I get some hot spots. Not quite enough to get blisters, but enough where I have had trust issues with this shoe basically the entire time of like, I'm about to go for a long run. I'm going to put the shoe on. I hope I don't get any blisters. There's been lots of other shoes where I know I'm not going to get any blisters, but the heel was still kind of a problem area for me in regards to the fit. So you mentioned that the forefoot was decent for you from a width standpoint.
100%. Yep, I would put it on the same level as like the Topo Pursuit that we reviewed earlier last year. Felt a lot of room there, and this was unique for me because I typically don't have that experience in a Salomon shoe.
Yeah, I would say from a forefoot standpoint, this is the widest Salomon that I've ever worn. Midfoot and heel definitely still gets narrow again. Not as narrow as like the S-Lab Pulsar, where that heel's like 1 inch wide. I would say that the narrowest part of the shoe is probably the stance right underfoot, like under the arch, because the heel actually does get a little bit wider, which contributed to some of the lockdown problems, because the actual heel width is to a point where like now the heel cup is this wide, and my heel, if your heel's not that wide, you're going to have some movement, which might actually also play into the type of terrain that you're going to be able to wear the shoe on. I also thought that like I've always had to deal with a sizing issue with Salomon, where I can run in 10. I can also run in 9.5. And I've gone back and forth. Like it's probably been 50-50 split for the shoes that I've worn. And I think if I were to wear this one again, because of the extra volume in the forefoot, I think I would actually go down that half size to the 9.5, because lengthwise, my 10 in a Salomon is always just a smidge long. I've been able to get the lockdown across the midfoot good enough where the extra length is fine. But I think if I was trying to race, it's like something short, more technical, I'd go down to that 9.5. I know I'd still have enough room in the 9.5, but I'd probably be able to control the shoe a little bit better at the sacrifice of a little bit of room in the forefoot. So depending on what you are looking to do in the shoe,
yeah,
you can kind of size half up, half down accordingly. Just because I thought it ran like, I thought it's just like ever so slightly long.
Interesting. Yeah, I wanted to add one more. This was a slight negative for me. You mentioned the issues with the heel cup in this shoe.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any issues with the heel cup, but I did have some issues with the material in the front part of the ankle collar. There was a bit of chafing for me on the front side of my ankle. Even when the lacing system, the garage was all locked down, I still felt like some bunching up there, and I did have relatively serious chafage. So could be unique to my foot, my ankle, but that was something to point out.
I think that's just a problem with this tiny lace garage. Like this thing is such a pain in the ass. Like the cheaper Salomon trail shoes that still have the quick lacing have a much wider lace garage, and it's much stretchier mesh, because you have to cram everything into this pocket that's like the size of a quarter, which I was able to, and like it's fine. You're now just like bunching up all these laces to come press down right where like your, I don't know, your like leg and your ankle meet. And then they had to put an extra amount of padding. And then when you seal in some padding, you have to tie it off at the top with a stitch. And the stitch at the top is not particularly soft. So like, fortunately, where the stitch hit me, it was okay. I also have like a pretty skinny ankle, so I probably had a little bit more room for it to play around. But like, if this shoe is really secure on your foot, you might actually, then get some abrasion type issues above the lace garage. But I'm wondering if they just widened that lace garage and like threw their old school pocket on there. That's a little bit less sexy, but a little bit more functional, like 2-car garage maybe might even out that pressure and actually not have the need for as high of a stitch.
One more thing that I liked that I think I should add in there, and we were talking about this offline, but it is that super soft, stretchy material that they put just underneath the mesh on the upper for padding purposes. That was a super comfortable ride for me, worth noting.
Oh, yeah. that material, this material is amazing. I wish they just made the entire shoe out of it. It's like a silk bed sheet underneath. It's like getting into silk sheets with like freshly shaven legs. Like that's kind of how it feels right underneath, like right at the top of my arch. Like I've heard rumors that Kilian Jornet back in the day would wear all of his S-Lab shoes sockless. And
Wow.
and I could see that in some instances. Because yeah, that material across the top is very, very soft. So in terms of like the actual ride, what did you think of, like the midsole foam and the shape and, how it all cohesively worked together?
I'm not sure where to categorize the outsole of this in terms of high cushion, responsive, somewhere in the middle, but it certainly to me didn't feel like like the Salomon equivalent of a Hoka shoe, for example, in terms of cushioning. But it also didn't seem like it had the level of responsiveness that we felt in the Adidas Agravic 2 shoe. So it's sort of a mystery for me where to categorize this. I would put it somewhere in the middle, and I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like it's definitely not a like Solomon's build of a Hoka. Like this is definitely firmer than most Hoka shoes. It kind of reminds me of that Goldilocks zone foam, so like the Topo Pursuit and the Ultra Mont Blanc Boa were like
Yes.
medium high stack shoes, but were also still kind of dense foam. And while this is Solomon's softest shoe, it's not mushy. Like it's still very bouncy. I'm curious, like 3 hours, I had no like foot fatigue in terms of like the pounding. My feet didn't get sore. So I'm really curious like how long I could actually go in this shoe before my feet really start to get tired. And I have a feeling it might actually be decently long, but I don't know if it would be like 100-mile type shoe for me. Um, what did you think of this rocker? Because like this is like one of the more higher stack Salomon shoes as well as more rockered Salomon shoes out there.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would second the Mont Blanc reference. I think that that's the perfect comparison to a shoe in another brand.
I guess from a foam standpoint.
From a foam standpoint. In terms of the rocker, yeah, I mean, I think I felt propelled forward in this shoe is the best way I'd put it. Like the shoe was sort of leading every next foot strike, but it didn't necessarily stick out to me. Why? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a flexible rocker, which I believe is like in the world of what is a trail super shoe. I think this is close because just running on like flat dirt roads, you do get a nice like propulsive feel. Like you definitely don't get Nike Vaporfly feels just because the foam's not as bouncy. But from a geometry standpoint, my feet spend less time on the ground in this shoe. Like I hit the ground, like my contact time is definitely reduced. But because this plate is still only plastic, it does still kind of like twist and contort to, mild to moderate single track. I mean, yeah, we just ran down in Phoenix last week on the last 20 miles of the Black Canyon Trail, which it's technical. Like there's a lot of rocks out there. You got to think, how was this shoe on, more technical terrain? Because I really only got to put it on like mild to moderate.
I would not use this shoe again on technical terrain. And my version of technical terrain is like, for example, the Speed Goat 50K course here on the Wasatch Front in Utah. I would also categorize like anything that's like relatively icy in snow conditions. Like how does it grip the ice and stuff like that? The trust there. This is not a shoe that I would take on technical terrain though. I could see this being used on like the Western States course or like the Lake Sonoma course or the Miwok 100K course where it's more like California carpet.
Dude, all races I wrote down for where I would race this shoe.
We're starting to be one mind. We're mind melding
I know.
here. So yeah, this to me is like the sexy California shoe that may get exposed in the Mountain West where more shit gets real in terms of trail conditions.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think I'm so curious though. I wonder how much of the problems of this shoe on technical terrain is due to the lack of security in the upper around the heel. Because when you add the plate and the shoe gets stiffer, if the heel doesn't also have some added stiffness, like I had the squirrely feeling where it felt like the shoe was gonna like twist out from under my heel because I could like, flatten the heel cup off to the side like this.
Yeah.
A shoe that actually I like this shoe more, but what this actually reminds me of, and I ran into similar problems, was the first North Face Flight Vective, their first carbon plated shoe. It had a very floppy collar, and then because it was so stiff underfoot, I had that shoe like roll out from underneath me a couple times, and like my
Yeah.
heel would just hit the ground because the shoe would twist out. This one wasn't as bad, but that was where I lacked a lot of security and would have a hard time trusting it on, super technical terrain.
That makes sense to me. But I'm like, what do you think of these Conta grip lugs?
Okay, I love the Conta Grip outsole. I think it's so good. Like, I think that it's very sticky and soft. They're not that the lugs aren't that deep. It's like they're only 3.5 millimeters. So on like even packed snow, or like ice or like chopped up ice, they're just not going to dig into the ground that much. So like even with mud, you're going to get a little bit of traction, but not a ton. Like if there was a soft ground version of the shoe where it had half as many lugs, but they were 5 millimeter lugs, I bet you would have a lot more success over there because Contagrip is known for being like one of the grippiest outsole rubbers in the game. But I think like just the pattern and like what this outsole is for is meant more for like, the California carpet, like little bits of exposure.
I feel like there are a lot of viewers out there, probably myself included, that will use lug depth as a proxy for how well these types of shoes perform on technical terrain. I think that what you said about like the lockdown of the upper is maybe a less obvious but equally important thing for folks to consider in the future.
Oh yeah, like I think on dry technical terrain, if this shoe had a good upper and like literally a flat outsole, it could be even better than what it is right now. Because like you don't really need lugs on like dry technical terrain. You just need something that like attaches itself to dirt and rocks, but you also just need a secure upper to, keep your foot locked down. Which I mean kind of leads to like what did Salomon design the shoe for, and did it hold true? And if we're taking off of we're taking it right off the Salomon site. So they said this shoe is meant for mixed terrain. They call it their max cushion shoe, which for Salomon it is one of their max cushion shoes. Medium protection, there is this plate here, protects the foot pretty medium amount, because it still has some flex to it. You're going to feel a few rocks, but you're probably not going to bruise your feet. They said like basically up to fast running, so that covers like the whole I guess gamut of speeds, which I think I agree for, assuming you're on mild to moderate, technical terrain. What do you think?
I just never know what to make of the phrase mixed terrain. I feel like it's the weather equivalent of like partly cloudy, like like what are they saying? Like a little bit of road, a little bit of trail, or like how are they like distinguishing the various elements? I'm just super confused.
I perceived mixed terrain as just like not super technical, because on there they have it's a little slider scale. I actually have their website pulled up right now. I'll just read. So like so on their running terrain, it actually starts with road, then goes to mixed terrain. This is of 5 categories actually. So we're only in category 2 of 5. So we're only 1 above road. Mixed terrain, rocky, muddy and soft, snow and ice. So like I think Solomon's gauge of terrain, running terrain is probably more leans more towards the actual extreme side of trail running. Like I trust theirs more than other trail shoe companies because they come from trails and mountains first. So, if 5 is the most gnarly, they gave this a 2, which I think that then makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think I was telling you offline, I wasn't sure where I would wear this shoe, maybe as an everyday trainer, maybe on some long runs. I don't feel like this is the shoe for workouts for me. I didn't necessarily feel fast in it when I was running with it. I know you probably feel differently. I could see myself wearing this in a 100-miler though, like especially Western States, which is equal parts show your best running self, but also show your best fashion statement. And I feel like
totally
this could be like a fashion statement shoe there.
See, I loved running I've done every trail workout for the last like 3 or 4 weeks in this shoe because I feel so fast in this shoe on the trails because all the workouts that I've been able to do on the trails here in Ashland are on pretty buffed out single track. So I just need a little bit of extra traction, but also like a kind of snappy, more explosive feeling ride. And that's exactly what this shoe delivers. The only like, and I would definitely race in it if I hadn't gotten those hotspot issues at the very beginning stages of the shoe. I haven't gotten any since like 20 miles in, but it was just enough where it would have me so nervous to start, say, a 50 mile or 100K and have that just come back and bite me in the ass later. And like, I just don't know if I could do it. Like, it was so close to being, because I'm racing the Lake Sonoma 50 mile in April, and I really thought this was going to be a serious contender, but I just don't quite trust the heel enough to put it on race day. If you don't get any of those hotspot issues, like this is absolutely like that, probably up to 100K, maybe even up to 100 mile for some people, like mild to moderate technical terrain, like, Lake Sonoma, Miwok 100K, locally the Siskiyou out and back races here, even something like Leadville. Like there's a lot of just running at Leadville and not as much super technical terrain as, what a lot of people think.
Can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
This is obviously the second version of this shoe. Salomon did make some updates from the previous version. Do you think that they made the right updates, or do you think they missed the mark?
I guess they clearly must have sold enough of the first one to realize that the shoe as a whole package is like pretty good and they didn't want to change it a ton. Maybe this is their way of buying one more year to totally revamp the shoe for generation 3. Because they acknowledged that their heel cups sucked in the first one, and that they were basically like, this should really be like Salomon Pulsar Trail Pro 1.25 instead of 2. But that's an ugly name. They don't want that. So I think for the second generation, they did probably like the easiest changes, which is going to make the people who nearly liked the shoe before happy, and it'll make a lot of people will still really like this shoe. I think the heel cup could still be better. I just wish it could be a little bit more comfortable, but for like a go fast kind of racing type shoe with a decent amount of cushion, maybe they were willing to sacrifice a little bit of comfort for extra lockdown, shave off a little bit of weight. Because if you don't have any issues with this heel cup, this is going to be an amazing shoe for you. Which kind of brings us to value. $160. What do you think? $160 for this shoe?
I'm so anchored to $280 these days that $160 feels like a screaming deal.
I'm not anchored to $280, but I think for $160, this is a fantastic value. I could have totally seen Salomon just throw in $225 the price tag for the shoe, because it has every single bit of technology that they could squeeze into a shoe. It's in this shoe, and yet they didn't even throw the S Lab branding on it. If they're calling this S Lab, that hikes the price of $20 automatically. But they didn't even do that. So for $160, and this is, I would say comparing the shoe, what did Salomon make the shoe to compete against? I think the Hoka Tecton X, the Saucony Endorphin Edge, pretty much every carbon plated trail racer out there, this shoe easily competes with, and for $40 less or more. And like, is it $40 worse? I don't think so at all. I think had Salomon made this shoe $200, like people probably would have bought it, just the same. But for $160, you can actually buy it and like put a ton of miles on it and go trash this thing and not feel guilty that you spent so much money on a shoe, because I think you do get a lot. And like, I see, I'm getting a little bit of midsole foam, crinklage in the midsole, but it hasn't really felt like it's starting to break down at all. There's a little divot in my foot. But I could totally see the sweet spot for this shoe lasting through 200, 250 miles. Then you kind of have your 100 miles of I should probably get new shoes, but I'll just keep running in these for one more run.
It's funny that, I've always associated Salomon with having sort of a luxury status in our sport from a branding standpoint. And it's funny that they could, in this particular circumstance, be the poor man's Tectonics.
How the tables have turned. I guess one other like minor complaint or worry that I forgot to mention until just now is I actually had some insole issues with this shoe. Like I don't know if it's the shape or that like the strobel board of the shoe that's like the piece that's underneath the insole. Like I don't know if it's slippery or something, but or just like the rockered shape to the shoe. But on when I was jamming down hills, I noticed my insole would actually start to slip back and start to wrap up into my heel cup, like just like up here. But there was a couple hard workouts where I would be descending hard and I would finish and I could feel that the tips of my toes were just barely hanging over the front of the insole because the insole had scooted back maybe almost a half an inch and then had started to slide its way up the back of the heel. That sketched me out because you don't want your insoles moving at all when you're running. So, I mean, you could glue it down. Like that's one thing I love about the Nike Trail shoes is Nike Trail, they glue down their insoles. They glue them down just enough where they don't move, but they don't add so much glue that you can't rip them up because you can still take them out. I think a little bit of glue on the insoles go a long way with this one.
Any other final thoughts? Any calls to action for the audience?
I'm really curious to see if there's any, because I didn't get to run in the first generation of this shoe. So what I'm hearing about this heel collar is all just from other people who've run in the second one. I'm curious to see if there's anyone who's run the first and second one. Let us know what you think of the changes. Like, was it better? What other shoes did this shoe remind you of? Like what did you like better even? And, again, if you do want to try these shoes out and your local run specialty shop does not have them, feel free to use our link below. Once we get that link, once these shoes go live on Running Warehouse, I believe it will be the beginning of March. So there might be a brief moment of time when we don't have a link there. But once you're there, feel free to use that. Help support the channel, these reviews. I think that's all we got for this one. I'm excited for, we're rolling with the shoe reviews now. We've got some exciting stuff coming up in the next few months.